Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. There is a profound and dangerous misconception out there. We've been taught that kindness is always the answer, that turning the other cheek is a virtue, that patience will mend the cracks in even the most broken people. But what if I told you that this very kindness, the thing you pride yourself on, is being weaponized against you? What if I told you that by being endlessly compassionate to a narcissist, you are not only enabling their worst behaviors, but sacrificing your own dignity in the process? See, there's a fundamental truth about human nature that we often overlook. Not everyone operates in good faith. Some people, narcissists, manipulators, thrive on your empathy. They see your kindness not as a virtue, but as an opportunity, a tool to be exploited. And the more you give, the more they take. So tonight I'm here to challenge you not to abandon kindness, but to wield it wisely, to stop feeding the insatiable hunger of those who drain you, who twist your goodwill into submission, because there is a fine line between being kind and being complicit. And the moment you realize that the moment you stop being an enabler, you reclaim something far more valuable than their approval. You reclaim yourself. Kindness is often regarded as one of the highest virtues a person can possess. From an early age, we are taught to be generous, patient, and understanding. We are told that kindness has the power to change people, to mend broken relationships, and to soften even the hardest hearts. And in many cases, this is true. But what happens when kindness is given without discernment? What happens when it is poured endlessly into a void that only consumes and never gives back? The reality is that kindness, when offered without boundaries, does not always heal. It can, in fact, enable and even encourage harmful behavior. A narcissist operates differently from the average person. They do not see kindness as an opportunity for mutual connection, nor do they appreciate it as an inherent good. Instead, they view it as a tool, a resource to be extracted and used for their own benefit. When a narcissist encounters kindness, they do not see the person behind it. They see an opportunity. Their mindset is transactional. They assess how much they can take, how far they can push, and how deeply they can entangle someone in their web of manipulation. The more kindness they receive, the more entitled they feel to it. This is why kindness, when given without limits, becomes a liability. It sends the message that there are no consequences for manipulation, no repercussions for exploitation. Narcissists will test boundaries subtly at first. They might start with small requests, minor manipulations, just to see how far they can go. And if they encounter no resistance, they escalate. They push further, taking more, demanding more, until the person offering kindness is left depleted and questioning how they got there. It is a mistake to assume that everyone interprets kindness in the same way. Most people see it as a gesture of goodwill, a bridge to deeper trust. But to a narcissist, it is a sign of weakness, a green light to continue their behavior unchecked. This is where the problem begins. When kindness is given without discernment, without the ability to recognize when it is being abused, it ceases to be a virtue and becomes a liability. A person who constantly prioritizes kindness over self-respect creates an environment where a narcissist can thrive. They give second chances, then third, then fourth, convincing themselves that patience and understanding will eventually change the narcissist's behavior. But a narcissist does not change in response to kindness. They change only when their tactics stop working, when they are held accountable, when they are forced to face consequences. The notion that kindness will eventually transform a narcissist is not only misguided, but dangerous. It keeps people locked in cycles of emotional abuse, convincing them that if they just love more, tolerate more, or forgive more, things will get better. This mindset allows the narcissist to maintain control, while the kind person sacrifices more and more of themselves. The imbalance in these relationships is staggering. The kind person becomes the giver, the fixer, the emotional caretaker, while the narcissist remains the taker, never reciprocating, never acknowledging the effort. Over time, the kind person becomes exhausted, emotionally drained, and often filled with self-doubt. They may begin to wonder if they are the problem, if they are not kind enough, if they are somehow failing in their efforts to reach the narcissist. But the truth is, the problem was never a lack of kindness. The problem was the absence of boundaries. A person who cannot say no, who cannot assert their own needs, who cannot recognize when they are being taken advantage of, becomes a magnet for those who thrive on unchecked generosity. A narcissist does not target those with strong boundaries. They target those who can be guilted, manipulated, and emotionally coerced into compliance. There is a crucial distinction between kindness and self-sacrifice. Kindness is an intentional act of goodwill. Self-sacrifice is the erasure of one's own needs in service of someone else's demand. When kindness crosses the line into self-sacrifice, it stops being a virtue and becomes a means of control. Except the control is no longer in the hands of the kind person, but in the hands of the narcissist who exploits it. The cycle continues until the kind person recognizes what is happening. Until they acknowledge that their kindness is not being appreciated, but rather used against them. Until they realize that they have been conditioned to believe that being good means never saying no, never setting boundaries, never walking. This conditioning is powerful, reinforced by cultural expectations, personal insecurities, and the narcissist's own manipulations. Breaking free from it requires a fundamental shift in perspective. People often fear that setting boundaries means becoming cold or uncaring. They worry that by saying no, by pulling away, they are betraying their own values. But the reality is that true kindness includes kindness to oneself. It includes the ability to recognize when one is being drained, when one is giving too much, when one is being used. It includes the strength to say enough. Narcissists operate in a way that is fundamentally different from most people. While the average person sees relationships as an exchange of trust, care, and mutual respect, a narcissist views them as opportunities for control and validation. They do not seek genuine connection. They seek admiration, attention, and most importantly, a steady supply of emotional energy. The more empathetic and generous a person is, the more valuable they become to a narcissist, not as a partner or friend, but as a resource to be exploited. At the core of a narcissist's behavior is an insatiable hunger for validation. They crave attention, praise, and emotional responses that affirm their importance. This need is relentless, and it is never truly satisfied. No matter how much reassurance they receive, it is never enough. They require constant reaffirmation of their superiority, and they seek out people who will provide it without resistance. Kind, empathetic individuals, those who naturally want to help, heal, and understand, are prime targets for this dynamic. A narcissist does not form relationships based on emotional depth. They form them based on utility. When they encounter someone who is highly empathetic and willing to give without expecting much in return, they see an opportunity. They begin a process of conditioning, subtly training the other person to prioritize their needs over their own. This conditioning often starts with charm, affection, and seemingly genuine interest. They make their target feel special, valued, and important. And this phase, sometimes called a love bombing in romantic relationships, is designed to build dependency. The kind person, overwhelmed by this initial affection, begins to believe that their kindness is making a real difference. They feel seen, appreciated, and cherished. But this phase does not last. Once the narcissist feels secure in their control, the dynamic shifts. They begin to withdraw affection, criticize, or subtly undermine the other person's confidence. They create a situation where the kind person starts questioning themselves. The emotional generosity that once felt valued is now treated as an expectation, something the narcissist is entitled to rather than something freely given. The kind person, desperate to regain the warmth and approval they once received, tries harder. They give more, tolerate more, sacrifice more, hoping that if they are just kind enough, patient enough, or understanding enough, things will return to the way they were. This is the trap. The more kindness the person offers, the more the narcissist takes stakes. The dynamic becomes entirely one-sided, with the kind person pouring themselves into someone who only receives. The narcissist's hunger for attention and validation is bottomless, and no amount of kindness will ever be enough. It is not that they fail to recognize generosity. It is that they feel entitled to it. They do not see kindness as a gift. They see it as their due. As this pattern continues, the kind person begins to feel drained. Their emotional energy is depleted, yet they struggle to pull away. Narcissists are skilled at creating cycles of reward and punishment, keeping their targets hopeful but insecure. They know when to offer small moments of affection or appreciation just to keep the other person engaged. These intermittent reinforcements create a powerful psychological bond, making it difficult for the kind person to break free. They hold on to the belief that their kindness will eventually change the narcissist, that if they are just patient enough, they will be rewarded. But this reward never truly comes. Another reason narcissists thrive on emotional generosity is that they seek to control narratives. They manipulate perception, ensuring that they are seen as victims or misunderstood individuals who deserve endless compassion. They will frame their actions as justified, their demands as reasonable, and any resistance as cruelty. The kind person, unwilling to be seen as unkind, continues to give. They excuse behavior, rationalize mistreatment, and convince themselves that their empathy is a virtue even when it is being used against them. Narcissists do not form relationships based on mutual care. They form relationships based on extraction. They are drawn to people who will fuel their ego, meet their needs, and sacrifice their own well-being to keep the dynamic intact. They do not seek partners, they seek suppliers. Their need for emotional energy is relentless, and they will take as much as they are allowed to take. The only way to stop this cycle is to recognize that no amount of kindness will ever be enough for someone who only knows how to receive. Not everyone deserves your empathy, though this idea may seem harsh at first. Empathy is often seen as one of the most admirable human qualities, allowing us to connect, support, and uplift those around us. It is the foundation of deep relationships, of understanding, of seeing beyond surface behaviors to the wounds and struggles that shape people. However, empathy is only meaningful when given to those who can appreciate it, respect it, and reciprocate it in some form. When directed toward the wrong people, especially narcissists, it becomes a weakness rather than a strength. A narcissist does not process empathy the way a healthy individual does. To them, it is not a bridge to mutual understanding, but rather a tool they can use to manipulate and control. They recognize empathetic individuals quickly, seeing them as easy targets who will excuse their behavior, tolerate their selfishness, and continuously offer second chances. The more empathetic a person is, the easier it becomes for a narcissist to twist their emotions, making them feel guilty for setting boundaries or standing up for themselves. This manipulation begins subtly. Narcissists often present themselves as victims of their circumstances, misunderstood individuals who have been wronged by others. They paint a picture of hardship, of pain, of a world that has failed them. This narrative is designed to trigger an empathetic response, making their target feel compelled to help, to soothe, to be the one person who truly understands them. The kind and empathetic person, wanting to believe in redemption and healing, invests themselves deeply. They take on the role of caretaker, of emotional support, of the one who will finally show the narcissist the love they supposedly never received. But this is an illusion. Narcissists are not seeking healing. They are seeking control. They use their fabricated or exaggerated struggles as a means to justify their behavior, to avoid accountability, and to keep others emotionally entangled with them. The empathetic person, believing they are helping, ends up caught in a never-ending cycle of emotional labor, constantly giving and never receiving. One of the greatest misunderstandings about empathy is the belief that it must be unconditional. True empathy requires discernment. It is not about offering endless patience to those who refuse to change. It is not about tolerating mistreatment simply because someone has a tragic backstory. Everyone has struggles, but not everyone uses those struggles as a justification to harm others. Narcissists take advantage of this blind spot in empathetic individuals, knowing that their victim narrative will be enough to keep them engaged, forgiving, and willing to endure mistreatment. The cost of misplaced empathy is immense. A person who continuously gives without receiving eventually becomes drained, losing their sense of self. They begin to question their own worth, wondering why their kindness is never enough. They may even internalize the narcissist's manipulations, believing that they are the problem, that they are selfish for wanting reciprocity, for feeling exhausted, for even considering pulling away. The narcissist reinforces this by framing any attempt to set boundaries as an act of cruelty. How can you leave me when I need you? If you really cared, you wouldn't give up on me. These statements are designed to trigger guilt, ensuring that the empathetic person remains trapped in the cycle. Empathy, when misdirected, becomes self-destructive. Self-destructive. There is no virtue in giving to someone who only takes. There is no honor in sacrificing your emotional well-being for someone who refuses to acknowledge their own toxic behavior. Not everyone deserves empathy, not because they are beyond redemption, but because they have no interest in change. They do not seek to grow, to heal, to engage in mutual understanding. They seek control, validation, and power over those who are willing to provide it. Recognizing this is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of self-preservation. There is a difference between being compassionate and being used, between being understanding and being exploited. It is not your responsibility to save those who do not want to be saved. Empathy should be reserved for those who respect it, who reciprocate it, and who do not weaponize it for their own gain. Setting firm boundaries is an act of self-respect. Many people struggle with boundaries because they fear being perceived as selfish, unkind, or unloving. They have been conditioned to believe that being a good person means always being available, always being understanding, and always putting others first. This mindset makes them particularly vulnerable to narcissists who thrive in environments where people are afraid to say no. They define what is acceptable and what is not, ensuring that relationships remain balanced and that personal well-being is not sacrificed for someone else's demands. Narcissists hate boundaries because they limit their ability to control and manipulate. They rely on others being too afraid, too guilty, or too uncertain to enforce them. At first, they may try to push back subtly, testing limits by making small demands, ignoring discomfort, or guilt-tripping when someone hesitates to comply. If these tactics succeed, they escalate, gradually increasing their level of entitlement until the other person is completely drained, unable to recognize how much they have given up in the process. Boundaries are essential because they disrupt this process before it can take root. They send a clear message that respect is not optional, that emotional energy is not an unlimited resource, and that relationships require mutual effort. They establish consequences for mistreatment and ensure that interactions occur on equal terms. Without them, narcissists will continue to take as much as they are allowed to take, never stopping until they are forced to. Many people struggle with setting boundaries because they fear conflict. Narcissists are experts at making boundary setting feel like an attack. They react with anger, guilt-tripping, or manipulation, framing the person enforcing boundaries as unreasonable or cruel. They might say things like, "I can't believe you do this to me," or "After everything I've done for you, you're really going to act this way." These responses are designed to make the boundary setter question themselves, to feel guilty enough to back down. But the truth is, these reactions are proof that the boundary was necessary in the first place. A person who respects you will not punish you for protecting your emotional space. Another reason people struggle with boundaries is the fear of losing relationships. Narcissists condition their targets to believe that love and approval are conditional, that setting limits will lead to abandonment. This fear keeps people stuck in toxic dynamics, afraid to stand up for themselves because they believe they will lose the person entirely. But any relationship that falls apart because of healthy boundaries was never built on real respect to begin with. Genuine relationships can withstand boundaries because they are based on mutual care rather than control. Learning to enforce boundaries is a process. It requires confidence, clarity, and consistency. Saying no is not always easy, especially when faced with manipulation or emotional pressure. But every time a boundary is upheld, self-respect is reinforced. Each moment of resistance against guilt-tripping or coercion strengthens the ability to prioritize well-being over appeasement. Narcissists will always test limits, but the more they encounter firm resistance, the less control they have. There is power in deciding what is and is not acceptable. There is strength in refusing to be treated as an emotional resource rather than a person. Boundaries are not selfish. They are a declaration of worth. They are the difference between being used and being valued, between being drained and being at peace. They are a necessary defense against those who seek to take without giving, to manipulate without accountability, and to control without consequence. Stop confusing tolerance with strength. Many people believe that enduring mistreatment, staying patient through manipulation, or continuously giving chances to someone who takes advantage of them is a sign of inner strength. They think that by tolerating bad behavior, they are proving their resilience, their loyalty, or their commitment to kindness. But tolerance, when misplaced, is not strength. It is self-betrayal. It is allowing oneself to be used under the illusion of being virtuous. The true strength does not lie in how much one can endure, but in how firmly one can stand against mistreatment. Narcissists depend on this misunderstanding. They know that people who value patience and perseverance will hesitate to walk away. They exploit this by creating cycles of manipulation that keep their victims hopeful yet powerless. They push boundaries just enough to cause distress, then provide small moments of relief to keep the person invested. This creates the illusion that things are improving, that if only more patience is exercised, the relationship will finally reach a healthy place. But this is an illusion. The narcissist is not changing. They are simply adjusting their tactics to maintain control. Strength is often mistaken for the ability to endure suffering. This is especially true in relationships where one person is deeply empathetic and the other is narcissistic. The empathetic person convinces themselves that by tolerating the narcissist's behavior, they are proving their dedication, their ability to love unconditionally. But unconditional tolerance is not love. It is self-sacrifice at the expense of personal well-being. Narcissists thrive in relationships where their behavior is excused. They test how much someone is willing to put up with, and each time they are forgiven without consequence, they push further. True strength is recognizing when enough is enough. It is having the courage to say that mistreatment is not acceptable, no matter the history, no matter the excuses, no matter the emotional investment. It is understanding that walking away is not weakness, but a refusal to participate in a dynamic that drains, depletes, and diminishes self-worth. Narcissists are skilled at making people feel guilty for choosing themselves. They frame boundaries as abandonment, self-respect as selfishness, and independence as betrayal. They manipulate emotions to ensure that their victim remains entangled, second-guessing their decisions, wondering if they are the problem. Many people stay in toxic relationships because they do not want to be seen as weak. They believe that leaving means they failed, that they were not strong enough to endure, to fix, to make things work. But the truth is, staying in a harmful situation is not proof of strength. It is proof of conditioning. Narcissists instill in their victims the idea that leaving is failure, that giving up on them is heartless, that true strength is shown by staying no matter how painful it becomes. This conditioning keeps people stuck, convincing them that their suffering has meaning, when in reality, It is simply being exploited. Choosing to stop tolerating mistreatment is a radical act of self-respect. It is a rejection of the false belief that love means enduring pain or that patience will eventually lead to change. Narcissists do not change because they are tolerated. They change only when their tactics stop working, when their control is no longer effective, when they are faced with real consequences. Tolerance, when misapplied, enables bad behavior rather than correcting it. Breaking free from this mindset requires a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing tolerance as a virtue in all circumstances, it must be recognized as something that has limits. It is good to be patient, but not when patience is used as an excuse for staying in harm's way. It is good to be understanding, but not when that understanding allows a narcissist to continue their cycle of abuse unchecked. Strength is not measured by how much pain one can endure, but by how willing one is to demand better. It is found in the ability to say no, to enforce boundaries, to refuse to be manipulated by guilt or obligation. Narcissists count on the idea that their victims will confuse tolerance with strength. They know that as long as someone believes that staying is proof of resilience, they will never leave. This is why they create situations that make their victim feel as if walking away is cowardly or unkind. They want to keep the illusion alive to make their target believe that if they just tolerate a little more, things will get better. But things do not get better with tolerance alone. They get better when the cycle is broken, when the dynamic shifts, when the person who has been endlessly patient finally decides that they deserve more than the constant exhaustion of tolerating someone who refused to change. Healing begins when you stop seeking closure from a narcissist. One of the most common traps people fall into after leaving a toxic relationship is the belief that they need closure to move on. They want explanations, apologies, or even just an acknowledgement of the pain they endured. They replay conversations, analyze past events, and imagine scenarios where the narcissist finally understands what they did wrong. This need for closure is natural, but when dealing with a narcissist, it is a dangerous illusion. Closure, in the way most people understand it, is something a narcissist will never provide. Narcissists do not take responsibility for their actions. They do not engage in honest self-reflection, and they do not seek to make amends. To acknowledge wrongdoing would require them to admit fault, and this is something their ego simply will not allow. Instead, they rewrite history to frame themselves as the victim. They will distort the truth, blame others, and dismiss the pain they caused as an overreaction. If confronted, they will either deny everything outright, gaslight their target into questioning their own perception, or offer a false apology that is meant to manipulate rather than heal. Waiting for closure from a narcissist is like waiting for a storm to apologize for the destruction it caused. It keeps a person emotionally tied to the past, unable to fully heal. The more someone seeks an explanation or an apology, the more power the narcissist retains over them. They feed on this lingering attachment, knowing that as long as someone is looking for answers, they are still emotionally invested. This allows the narcissist to continue exerting control even after the relationship has ended. They may occasionally reach out not to provide closure, but to stir emotions to keep the person engaged, to remind them that they still hold space in their mind. True closure does not come from the narcissist. It comes from within. It is the realization that no apology or explanation will change what happened. It is accepting that the narcissist's inability to acknowledge their behavior is not a reflection of the victim's worth, but a fundamental flaw in the narcissist's character. Healing does not require understanding why the narcissist did what they did, because the answer will never be satisfying. Their behavior was not about logic or fairness. It was about control, validation, and self-preservation at the expense of others. One of the hardest aspects of walking away is letting go of the desire to be understood. People who are deeply empathetic often want to believe that if they could just explain things clearly enough, the narcissist would finally see the harm they caused. But narcissists are not interested in understanding, they are interested in winning. Any conversation that appears to be about resolution will ultimately be used as an opportunity to regain control. They will twist words, shift blame, or turn the discussion into a debate about the victim's flaws rather than their own actions. The more someone tries to reason with them, the more ammunition they provide for further manipulation. Healing begins when the need for their validation is abandoned. It is a shift from seeking external acknowledgement to creating internal closure. It is realizing that an apology would not undo the damage, that an explanation would not erase the pain, and that waiting for accountability would only prolong the suffering. It is choosing to close the door, not because the narcissist finally admitted fault, but because continuing to engage would only cause more harm. Self-forgiveness is a crucial part of this process. Many people who escape narcissistic relationships struggle with feelings of guilt or regret. They wonder why they stayed so long, why they ignored red flags, why they allowed themselves to be manipulated, but blaming oneself only reinforces the damage done. Healing requires recognizing that staying was not a sign of weakness, but a reflection of deep empathy and hope. It means understanding that the lessons learned from the experience can be used to create a healthier future, rather than dwelling on past mistakes. The moment true healing begins is the moment the narcissist's opinion no longer matters. It is when their approval, their version of events, their refusal to acknowledge the truth is no longer relevant. It is when their absence is seen not as a loss, but as a necessary step toward peace. It is the realization that closure does not come from a final conversation, a heartfelt apology, or a moment of recognition. It comes from deciding that the past no longer has power over the present.